Hola amigas, ¿cómo están? Buenas tardes y bienvenidos a este live. Mi nombre es Cecilia Carnero y el día de hoy estoy a través de la página de Training Group, que es una empresa especializada en realizar cursos, conferencias y certificaciones internacionales con grandes referentes de la industria del fitness, del entrenamiento y la nutrición. Y precisamente el día de hoy tenemos a un súper invitado. Él es especialista y doctor en ciencias del ejercicio. Ha ganado el año pasado inclusive el top 2 como investigador en ciencias del deporte, del entrenamiento. Él es divulgador, investigador y bueno, sin más que decir, estamos hablando nada más y nada menos que del doctor Brad Schoenfeld. Vamos a tener una entrevista el día de hoy con él. Y bueno, la entrevista va a ser en inglés. Va a ser por a Brad.
Hello.
Hi Brad.
How are you?
How are you today? Can you hear me well?
Yeah, I can see you great. How about you?
Okay, I'm great. Yeah, how are things over there?
It's tough, you know. I'm in the epicenter. New York is where the most cases are, but we're making do, and it's tough.
Yep.
But like everyone else, we're enduring.
Yeah, here in Peru we have a curfew, but well, it's important to remind people to stay safe at home, and let's hope we can get through it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Brad, thanks for being here with us today. I prepared some questions for people to get to know you a little bit more about your work. And also we have some questions from the audience. So I'm gonna ask them in English first, in Spanish first, and then I'm going to translate it into English. Okay?
Bien, porque mi habla español muy poquito, pero yo estoy aprendiendo, but it would be much better for you to translate.
Okay, o sea, para las personas que recién se están conectando, estamos con Brad Schoenfeld y les vamos a hacer algunas preguntas para que conozcan un poco más sobre su trabajo, sobre su experiencia en el campo de la ciencia del entrenamiento. Voy a preguntarle primero en español y luego le voy a hacer la traducción en inglés. La primera pregunta para Brad es, ¿cómo empezaste con la ciencia y cuál fue tu primera experiencia como investigador? So Brad, how do you start with science and what was your first experience as a researcher?
So my background, actually, I was a personal trainer for many years, and then I moved into to becoming an educator. I went on for my master's degree and got my PhD degree. When you say my first experience with science, you're talking about as a researcher or as just...
Yeah, your first experience as a researcher. How do you start with science, with research?
Well, it basically came about when I took a job as an adjunct professor at my trainer. I was in the kind of bridging from being a trainer to being an educator, and I carried out my first research study while I was in my PhD. I looked at the muscle activation in the rear delt fly using either a neutral grip or a pronated grip, and I was hooked. Once I started getting into research, it just really locked in for me, and that was kind of it. And I ended up selling my training practice. I had my own business. I sold that and never looked back.
Okay, voy a traducir lo que él ha dicho. Él ha hablado un poco sobre sus inicios en el entrenamiento, en el campo de la investigación y de la ciencia. Él empezó siendo, bueno, como todos con la curiosidad de querer investigar un poco más, especialmente de sus entrenamientos deltoides. Entonces él empezó poco a poco a ir investigando un poco más para aprender cómo maximizar las ganancias musculares, y de eso en adelante ya no hubo marcha atrás, simplemente continuó y ahora pues es un gran investigador en... Perhaps they don't, but you were also a natural bodybuilder back in the day. What is your best advice for people deeply passionate about bodybuilding?
So a couple things. First, if you want to go into bodybuilding, you need to be deeply passionate, because it's a very grueling process. So it's people just think they step on stage, but the most important thing would be to get to know your body. So different people respond differently to both nutrition and to exercise. And what I would suggest is consider your first few competitions as learning experiences. You might not, everyone thinks they're going to go and they're just going to win their first show. Maybe you will. I mean, genetics, of course, have a lot to do with that. But usually, I was dead last in my first show. I ended up winning multiple competitions, but I had no idea really what I was doing. But each one was a learning experience. My first one, I was dead last, and I did a little better in my second one, and then I was second in my third one, and then I won multiple ones after that. So I ended up competing in that. I learned about carb deplete, carb load, how to reduce calories, how much to do that, not to do it. Anyway, there are all sorts of things, and everyone is different. I've worked with many highly competitive and professional bodybuilders and physique athletes and figure competitors over the years. And the programs are always very individualized. So you got to know what works. You got to learn what works for you, and then once you do, you can then go on and make the best of your genetics.
Ok, so la pregunta para Brad fue, él primero se inició, probablemente muchos de ustedes no saben, pero él ha sido un competidor de fisicoculturismo hace años, y mi pregunta fue, ¿cuál es el mejor consejo que puede dar las personas que se inician en el mundo de las competencias de fisicoculturismo? Y su mejor consejo para estas personas es que sean apasionados, si en verdad quieren competir, si quieren subir al escenario, deben aprender a conocer su cuerpo, aprender que no siempre van a ganar. Al inicio se trata de que esta experiencia sea enriquecedora, que aprendas a manejar tus cuerpos, a ver qué es lo que funciona mejor en ti, y luego aplicar esa experiencia, ese conocimiento en poder mejorar tu competencia y llegar a mejores puestos. De hecho, él en sus primeras competencias perdió, no ganó, y poco a poco ha ido sumando experiencia, ha tenido como 7 u 8 what people are eager to hear you talk about, which is muscle gains. So, what makes us gain muscle throughout time, and is there a limit to the amount of muscle we can gain in a lifetime? If so, when do we reach this limit?
It's a really interesting question. So there is a ceiling to how much muscle you can gain. A ceiling meaning that there's a limit, but no one ever reaches their genetic potential. So really what happens is that at the beginning of training, you can make very quick gains. And then you start getting closer to your ceiling, then the gains start to level off. But they should never, there's never a point, I've worked with, literally hundreds and hundreds of different people and high-level bodybuilders. You're always able at some point to gain more muscle depending upon how you want to go through it, but it's going to be much slower. So the thought of a ceiling in theory is there, but in actuality it comes down to, as you start getting closer to your ceiling, you then have to become more intuitive and more conscious of your own body and how it responds to keep getting gains. So at the beginning you could do almost anything and or most people can, and you'll see decent gains. But that's where, as you start getting closer to your ceiling, theoretical ceiling, because it really is not a ceiling. It's not a ceiling; it's a moving ceiling, but it's not doesn't move that much. And as you start getting closer to that ceiling, that's where the science becomes a lot, and nutrition to optimize your own genetics. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. La pregunta para Brad fue, en cuanto a ganancias musculares, si es que podemos alcanzar nuestro potencial en toda nuestra vida, que tenemos entrenamiento, y si es así, si tenemos un límite para ganar masa muscular. Y la respuesta de Brad fue que en teoría sí existe un techo para ganancias musculares, y al inicio es mucho más fácil que un principiante o un novato gane masa muscular mucho más rápido, pero en algún punto en su vida de entrenamiento sí va a llegar a ese techo o ese límite de ganancias musculares. Y ahí es donde entra la ciencia para que tú puedas manipular diferentes variables, ya sea de entrenamiento, en tus rutinas, en tu alimentación, para que puedas, pues, digamos, seguir subiendo ese techo, porque no es que exactamente hay un límite, sino que ese techo va subiendo a lo largo de tu vida, y ahí es precisamente donde entra la ciencia. Brad, you recently published a new study where you mentioned there is no benefit to training a muscle based on its fiber type. Can you explain what is the myth surrounding this idea, and what were your findings in your study?
Yeah, so I would not say, this is one of the things that I really want to make a point on, that I wouldn't say that's a myth at this point, because we didn't debunk that. The evidence for that particular study did not show a benefit to it based on the design that we had. It doesn't mean it still might not happen. It raises skepticism. It makes us more skeptical that it can happen. But there has been some evidence that it does happen. I'm not going to completely say it won't, but I would say that the evidence based upon what we did, and we had a kind of a unique design where we looked at the calf muscles. So there's two primary calf muscles, your gastrocnemius and your soleus. The soleus is a slow twitch muscle, and the gastrocnemius is a mixed muscle, but it has more fast twitch fibers. And we had one leg, so each subject had one leg do a high repetition range, so 20 to 30 reps, and the other leg did a low rep range, 6 to 10 reps. And there was no difference between the two muscles. The soleus and the gastroc had roughly the same growth. And you would have expected, if there was a difference in fiber type based on the rep range, that the soleus would have been more responsive to the high rep and the gastroc to the lower rep, and that didn't happen in this study. So what I would say is that this gives evidence against the possibility or the theory that that happens, but we still need more research. There has been some studies that do seem to show a benefit. There's been other studies that don't. And I think the next step would be, and hopefully we'll get to carry this out, where we do a biopsy, and actually days ago when it's open access, so I encourage everyone to check it out and see for themselves.
Okay, so la pregunta para Brad fue si en el estudio que ha publicado recientemente acerca del beneficio de entrenar el músculo para atacar ciertas fibras es verdad, o si hay un mito alrededor de esto, y cuáles eran sus conclusiones con este estudio. Y su respuesta fue que no es que haya una evidencia concluyente de que se puede entrenar el músculo dependiente de su fibra. Y en ese estudio lo que vieron precisamente fue dos personas entrenando las pantorrillas, específicamente el sóleo y el gastrocnemio, con un entrenamiento en altas y bajas repeticiones, y lo que hallaron fue que no hubo diferencias significativas en el desarrollo de masa muscular en las pantorrillas, y pues habría que buscar mayores estudios más adelante para llegar a mayores conclusiones de que se puede efectivamente entrenar un músculo según su tipo de fibra. Este estudio lo pueden encontrar en su página web, es completamente gratis, ya está publicado además. Brad, there is an important macronutrient for muscle building, which is protein. It's very popular amongst the bodybuilding circles and highly underestimated by the general population. What are the effects in the muscle of over-consuming protein? Is there a certain population which will benefit with higher amounts of protein intake? And what exactly will happen in the body with protein excess? Will it turn to fat?
Yeah, so Who needs more protein? Well, anyone who exercises regularly, particularly those who are serious resistance training athletes, and they certainly need roughly double the amount of a sedentary population. Who might need more? Well, I actually saw one of my colleagues is on, actually published a paper about a year ago in Sports Medicine and hypothesized that that some of the bodybuilders, that if you're a real serious bodybuilder, especially when you're doing higher volume training and you're in an overreaching phase, that might require even higher amounts of protein. That we don't know. What happens if you overconsume protein? Most of it just becomes oxidized, so it doesn't, basically you just don't use it. As far as turning to fat, now if you overconsume calories, more calories will turn to fat. Protein, of all the three macronutrients, which are fats, carbohydrate, and protein, protein has the least likely effect to be turned into fat. So again, if you overconsume calories, it's going to go to fat, but protein has a higher thermic effect, which is the amount of calories that are burned off during the digestive process, and it's harder to turn protein into fat, if you will, or so over-consuming protein would have the least effect, but any macronutrient, if you do over-consume it, would. And by the way, I'll mention there is really no good evidence that consuming high amounts of protein will negatively affect bone or kidney function, assuming you're healthy. Now, if you have kidney issues, then that's a different story. Renal disease, kidney disease. But other than that, basically it just gets oxidized, it gets burned off for fuel.
Ok, la pregunta para Brad fue, siendo y quiénes se beneficiarían en realidad de un consumo mayor de proteína en cuanto a la ingesta diaria, y si hay una población o un público específico que debería consumir mucho más proteína, y qué pasa cuando consumes proteína en exceso, si en verdad se convierte en grasa. Y su respuesta fue que las personas que se beneficiarían de un mayor consumo de proteína son las que están haciendo entrenamiento de fuerza, específicamente las personas que se están sobreexigiendo en su entrenamiento, volúmenes más grandes, mayor intensidad, como por ejemplo un competidor de fisicoculturismo, y que todavía hay evidencias de que sí, ellos pueden beneficiarse para generar mayores ganancias musculares, pero que no hay ningún peligro de consumir un exceso de proteína, y evidencia de que es completamente seguro, y solamente sería un problema para personas que tienen ya condiciones médicas o un historial médico anterior, y que el exceso de grasa, lo que pasa con este consumo en exceso es que simplemente se oxida, se utiliza como energía, la grasa consumida en exceso, y ya vendría a ser otra historia cuando se consumen los otros macronutrientes en exceso, que son carbohidratos y grasas. Ahí sí podría haber una ganancia grasa, pero la proteína en sí, como macronutriente, tiene un efecto termogénico, y su exceso, su consumo, su ingesta en exceso no repercutiría en la salud y simplemente se oxidaría.
Yeah, when I hear you talking like that, it makes me realize again how much I need to learn Spanish. I got to get back.
Okay, Brad, we now have the second edition of your book. So can you tell us about the first edition? Why is it considered a must-have if you are ready, if you're really into maximizing muscle mass? And what new additions can we find in this new edition?
Yeah, so first of all, this is a textbook. It is not like a consumer book, so you have to have at least some background, or you should, to really appreciate the full extent of the book. The update, so this book goes through every aspect. It teaches the mechanisms of hypertrophy. It goes basically from the most basic level of molecular aspects of muscle all the way up to muscle variables or training variables such as volume, intensity of training, frequency of training, failure, etc. And then all the way up to actually constructing a program. How does cardiovascular exercise interact, which is called concurrent training with hypertrophy. The new edition is, I mean, the older edition was almost 5 years old, so it has a ton of new information. It's about 30% new information, all updated, completely up to date. And it also has 2 new chapters. I have an entire new chapter on how to actually measure muscle hypertrophy. So how do we look at like DEXA, dual X-ray absorptiometry, ultrasound, MRI, like what are the tools that we use to measure it and what are their strengths and weaknesses. And I also have another chapter on advanced training techniques, such as drop sets and supersets, eccentric training, etc. So just a ton of information. If you're really into learning the science of hypertrophy, this is the book.
Ok, la pregunta que le hice a Brad fue acerca de su libro, que él ha sacado una segunda edición. Esta es una nueva edición de su libro. El anterior, la primera edición, fue de hace 5 años. Y le pregunté cuáles son la nueva información que podemos encontrar en experiencia o cierta conocimiento, familiaridad con los términos de entrenamiento, de la ciencia en general. Y lo que podemos encontrar en este libro es todo acerca del entrenamiento, volumen, variables, cómo realizar una buena rutina, cómo aplicarlo hacia ti. Y encontramos también 2 nuevos capítulos, uno acerca de los estudios que realizaron para poder realizar este libro, y el segundo sobre técnicas de entrenamiento avanzado. El libro ya está disponible en las plataformas para que lo puedan adquirir y es 100% recomendable si lo tuyo es conocer acerca de la hipertrofia y la ciencia del músculo. Brad, regarding the fitness industry, we know that some of the great leading researchers, which is a leader with great educators and researchers, what are your predictions for the industry in South America in general? How do you see that industry here?
Well, I mean, I will say that, so certainly the U.S., I think, probably has the most research in sports science, but I collaborate with a number of groups in Brazil, laboratories in Brazil. And Brazil, I think, next to the U.S., probably has the most, I would say, certainly for hypertrophy, the best sports science programs around, or at least the most prolific. I mentioned my colleague Alex Ribeiro, who I've collaborated on, well over a dozen studies with, and he has one of the best labs around. But I mean, the lab at Sao Paulo is terrific. There's just so many. And I've collaborated with Diego Bonilla, who I think we're going to be speaking, and he's, so I collaborate with him who's in Colombia, I believe, right? And we collaborate through a lab in Spain. So I mean, I think that, and there's in Chile, there's another great lab. So I don't know about Peru. I have not collaborated. I do not believe with the science in South America, and again, particularly Brazil, is tremendous. And I think that sports science in general just has we're really in the infancy, and I would hope one of the things when I come to Peru, hopefully I will help to inspire young up-and-coming researchers or aspiring researchers to go into the field. So that's one of my passions at this point in my life, is to spread to educate and to spread the importance of evidence-based practice, and hopefully have other people follow in the footsteps of those who've come before them.
Ok, la pregunta para Brad fue acerca de la industria del fitness. Sabemos que la mayoría se basa en Estados Unidos, también tenemos algunos en Europa, pero ¿cuál era su opinión acerca del futuro de la industria del fitness en Sudamérica en general? Y su respuesta fue que en verdad hay un buen avance en cuanto a la investigación científica, especialmente en Brasil, donde él ha participado en numerosas colaboraciones con sus colegas de Brasil. Hay muchos laboratorios científicos bien preparados. También ha colaborado en Colombia con Diego Bonilla. Y en Perú, bueno, no conocen Perú todavía laboratorios científicos, pero que él con mucha con mucho entusiasmo, y la ciencia basada en evidencia, y que su misión es esa en realidad, poder inspirar a más personas a seguir el camino de la ciencia, de poder averiguar todo lo que es la ciencia del músculo, el entrenamiento y la nutrición. Brad, I'm going to ask some questions from the audience here, if that's okay with you. We
Sure.
have some questions live, so okay, I have this one here. Are there any studies on how neck muscles respond to training?
How neck muscles respond to training? I have not seen that I recall, if you're talking about hypertrophy, a specific study that has looked at neck hypertrophy. But I don't see, I mean, there'd be no reason why it wouldn't respond to training. Every muscle responds to training if you evoke a stimulus that's going to make it grow. I cannot say that I recall a study that has looked at that.
Ok, la pregunta es si hay algún estudio en cuanto a la respuesta de los músculos del cuello en el entrenamiento, y él menciona que actualmente no se acuerda de algún estudio en específico, pero que en general cualquier músculo va a responder al estímulo del entrenamiento en cuanto generes ese estímulo, ¿no? El músculo cualquiera va a responder. We have another question here, Brad. Can you target your medial lateral head of your triceps?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We actually just published a study. Well, I collaborated on a study with the group in Brazil from Sao Paulo, my colleague Emerson Teixeira, his lab. And we looked at doing bench press versus a lying tricep extension, so a single joint lying tricep extension versus a bench press, or a combination of lying triceps and bench press. And what we found was that the bench press gave more lateral head, the lying triceps gave more on the long head, and the medial head was kind of in between with both. But it would actually, what's the theory here is that in bench press is more elbows in. So a exercise where you're stretched works more on the long head. And technically, we didn't look at this, but a press down would work more in the lateral medial head region. So combining an exercise where your elbows are close to your body would technically get more in the lateral and medial heads. And if you're going to keep your elbows more lengthened, you know, if you're going to keep your long head stretched like this, that would target more of the long head.
Ok, la pregunta para él es si se puede trabajar directamente la cabeza media lateral del tríceps, y su respuesta es que en por ejemplo, o también ejercicios como extensión de tríceps estando echado, tipo press francés, y lo que ha encontrado es que cuando estás con los codos más pegados al cuerpo es que trabajas mucho más la cabeza medio lateral, o de lo contrario con los codos un poco más alejados estás trabajando más la cabeza media. Okay, you have another question here. Okay, is 100 reps system good for gaining muscle in your reps?
I'm not sure exactly what he means by what. If you're talking about just doing 100 reps consecutively, probably not. There was another study that I collaborated on with the same group in Brazil from Sao Paulo that was headed by my colleague Tiago Lasavicius. And we found that, so we looked at 20% 1RM, 40% 1RM, 60% and 80%. And the 20% was like 80 reps. The 40% was like 50 reps. I forgot the exact amounts. But anyway, 40%, 60%, and 80% all had very, it had substantially lower hypertrophy. So it seems when you get too high in your rep count that it actually starts to have a negative effect. There's a limit to how many, there's a certain limit for tension, so a threshold, and it seems to be somewhere around 30% or so is, if you look at the literature. So probably when you're getting above around 60 reps or so, it stops being very effective.
Ok, la pregunta para Brad fue si entrenar los abdominales con repeticiones muy altas, como 100 repeticiones, sería efectivo para hipertrofiar esa zona, para ganar músculo en los abdominales. Y lo que él menciona es que en los estudios que participó con sus colegas de Brasil, vieron justamente el entrenamiento de abdominales, y lo que hallaron fue que un entrenamiento con un volumen muy excesivo o con repeticiones muy altas, en realidad tendría un efecto negativo, porque hay un umbral en cuanto a qué tanto puedes entrenar tus abdominales, y el mejor rango para entrenarlo sería con volúmenes bajos de entrenamiento. Okay, Brad, we have a couple more questions here. Okay, here.
Well, can you? You could do whatever you want. The question is that going to be the most effective way to train them? I would say that would not be the most effective way to train them. I think the calves might have, they certainly don't overtax the body. So I think you probably can get away with training them more frequently to add on more volume. To say every day, I think at some point you're going to tap into your recovery. It's never been studied. So if you're asking, we have looked at training like 6 days a week versus 3 days a week, and they're in other muscles, not in the calves, but in other muscles, and that does not seem to really be a benefit, at least when the volume is equated. Now, can there be maybe a benefit to training the calves somewhat more frequently? Perhaps, but again, that has not been studied. I generally do think the calves certainly can endure more work than other muscles, but every day is something I've never prescribed and think that there'd be limited utility to it.
Digamos, problemas en que crezcan, o si es una zona muy terca de crecer, y su respuesta fue que en general no recomienda entrenar ciertos grupos musculares todos los días, pero las pantorrillas pueden soportar mayor carga de trabajo muscular que otras zonas del cuerpo, pero en general, digamos que entrenar todos los días ciertas zonas o ciertos grupos musculares interferiría inclusive con tu proceso de recuperación, así que no recomienda el entrenamiento diario para ningún grupo muscular. Okay, Brad, okay, we have an important question here regarding supplementation. Is HMB, does it work for better growth more than whey?
No. No. Yeah, I mean, it's no. The HMB has never been, so HMB is a metabolite of leucine, which is it's one of the essential amino acids. Leucine is in very high content in whey. HMB is no better than leucine, and whey has other essential amino acids. So whey is always better than HMB. There's really no research whatsoever. And if you're taking in sufficient amounts of daily protein, HMB has not been shown to to have additional benefits as long as you're taking in sufficient daily protein. So that's an easy question to answer.
Ok, la pregunta es si el HMB puede ser mejor que la proteína whey para el desarrollo de la masa muscular, y la respuesta es que en realidad no, porque el HMB vendría a ser leucina metabolizada, y que en general el whey ya tiene, además de leucina, tiene mayor cantidad de otros aminoácidos, un perfil completo. Si ya estás consumiendo proteínas de alta calidad de whey, HMB no es mejor que el whey para el desarrollo de la masa muscular. Okay, here we have one question regarding core muscles. Is hypertrophy for the core muscles different than other muscles, I guess?
First of all, you have to define the core muscles. I mean, are you just talking about the abdomen? Because the core can be, people have different interpretations and definitions of what they say the core is. So people consider the quads part of the core. So if you're just talking about the abdominal muscles, which a lot of people just consider core abdominals, and I'll kind of go with that, is it different? It's only different in the sense it's harder to contract the muscles as effectively to shorten them. Like the biceps, they have a long range, so I mean it's hard to show on this, but a lot of muscles like the lat, and the muscle itself it's a sheath muscle, so it's somewhat harder to develop. But as far as is there any difference in terms of how to train them? It's never really been studied well, and if you just look at its composition from a fiber type perspective, there'd be no reason really to think that.
Okay, la pregunta es si se puede hipertrofiar el core o la hipertrofia del core, el desarrollo de masa muscular en el core, en los músculos del core, es diferente al desarrollo de masa muscular en cualquier otro músculo del cuerpo. Y lo que él nos indica es que primero hay que diferenciar cuál es el concepto que tenemos de músculos del core, porque el core abarca muchos músculos, pero si te refieres específicamente al entrenamiento de los abdominales, bueno, en realidad no hay muchos estudios al respecto, pero que no tendría por qué ser diferente a entrenar otro tipo de músculos. Okay, Brad, one last question before we go. Okay, okay, here we have one. Did you ever publish the valve study you were working on before?
I don't know what he means by I'm not sure what the valve study is. I don't know what that is.
Okay. Another question.
Yeah.
Okay, here we have one. What would you recommend for a person with chondromalacia?
I'll move on from that question. So I don't recommend, when it comes to a medical condition like chondromalacia, that is specific to a physician. Like there's a different degree of condition because there's too many factors that go into play.
Right. So it's better they go to a specialist.
That's exactly it. And then you'd have to speak to the specialist to find out what specifically they have and the extent of it.
Ok, en cuanto a las preguntas sobre entrenamientos específicos con una condición médica, lo mejor es que vayan con un especialista en rehabilitación para que les dé las indicaciones sobre el tipo de entrenamiento cuando tienen alguna condición física. Okay, and one last question. Okay, this is a typical question I'm sure you get a lot. How many times or how many reps, I think he means, how many reps do you need to train your muscle during cutting?
Yeah, I do get that a lot, and the answer is no more than you do for when you're building. So I do not recommend changing the repetition range for cutting. Cutting comes down to reducing body fat, which is generally a function of nutrition. So if I'm working with a, let's say, physique competitor, I will manipulate diet to bring down body fat to cut, but the training stays pretty constant as far as the repetition range, etc. Volume can be changed, so it would depend upon the person, but there is no cutting rep range. So it's not like you're going to get more cut by doing higher reps, which is a myth. That's a myth, that higher reps cut. So basically, you still look to maintain or build muscle while you're losing body fat. That's how you get cut.
Ok, la pregunta que le hicieron a Brad es la típica que siempre le hacen y es ¿cuántas repeticiones debes realizar cuando estás en etapa de definición? Y lo que Brad nos informa es que esto es completamente un mito, el que exista cierto rango de repeticiones para definir o para volumen, y en realidad el rango puede ser bastante amplio. Lo que va a dictar y va a hacer que en realidad es una etapa de definición es finalmente tu alimentación, tu tipo de dieta. Así que lo que él recomienda con sus atletas es simplemente darle unas diferentes variables de entrenamiento y manipular su alimentación, su dieta para poder llegar a... Please tell us a little bit more about your coming conference in Peru next year.
Sure. Before I do, I want to give a shout out. I saw she's on here too. So to someone I was working with, Deborah Borges. She's a bikini competitor who unfortunately, she was in amazing shape, and then because of the coronavirus, everything got canceled right before she was ready to compete. But she is one of the hardest working competitors I've ever worked with, and just a great person. So shout out to Deb. I saw her on here. And as far as the conference, I'm really looking forward to being in Peru. I'm really stoked. I've wanted to go to Peru for a very long time. And I'm just looking forward to sharing the knowledge. So we're going to be giving a full day lecture on how to get jacked, on how to maximize muscle growth.
And to learn some Spanish.
Yeah. See, I'll be doing it in English, but I will be I will be estudiar español before antes viajar.
Viajar a Perú.
Yeah, sí. So, sí, I'm aprendiendo. Yo aprendiendo. So, in all seriousness, so it's going to be, we're going to get into the science, and then we're also going to get into how to create routines. It'll be a fun time. I do this a lot, and I just love educating. I'm just, as hopefully you could tell, really passionate about this. I love educating.
Va a venir a Perú el próximo año y nos está hablando de lo que va a hablar en su conferencia. Va a estar hablando sobre ganancias musculares, sobre pérdida de grasa, cómo maximizar, cómo aplicarlo en tu contexto, cómo armar tu propia rutina para maximizar tus ganancias. Y en general es una conferencia que no se puede perder. Él va a estar el próximo año en Perú y está muy emocionado de poder venir, poder enseñar, que es su pasión, y lo esperamos pronto. And to end this live, Brad, do you have any final thoughts and advice for the future researchers and scientists in the sports industry?
Well, yeah. So my advice is you need to have passion. So if you're looking to be a researcher, it's a long road. Your PhD, first you have to go to, I'm not sure how it works in South America, but certainly in the US, first you have to go your undergrad, then you get a master's degree, then you go for a PhD, and you have to do a dissertation. That's a lot of school, a lot of work. And unless you're very passionate about it, you can make money a lot quicker if you go into being a trainer and get out there working. But this to me is a passion field in the world. Being a researcher and an educator is the most noble and greatest job in the world. And as you can tell, I'm very passionate about it. And if other people are, we need good educators, because the one thing that I'll say is that the fitness field is very, there's a lot of bullshit in the fitness field.
Yeah, there is.
I don't know how to say that in Spanish, but there's a lot of crap that goes around, a lot of non-scientific stuff that goes down, and we need to really educate people on the science to move the field forward. And that the only way that can happen is by getting the young people to go into research and into education.
La pregunta para Brad fue cuáles son sus pensamientos finales y sus consejos para las personas que están interesadas en el mundo de la ciencia, de la investigación, del entrenamiento, y su mayor consejo es que en verdad tenga pasión porque van a hacer, porque eso implica muchos años de trabajo, muchos años de experiencia, de poder volcar en realidad toda esta pasión en el campo de la ciencia y de la investigación, y eso es lo que prácticamente hace. Él vive para eso, él respira de eso prácticamente. Entonces en verdad es muy apasionante para él poder enseñar a los demás, especialmente en un mundo que está tan lleno de mentiras y de tantos mitos y tanta pseudociencia, tanta desinformación. Lo que él recomienda antes que nada es que la gente se eduque y que aprendan para poder contrarrestar esta industria en un mundo pues donde vale mucho más